Hello and welcome to episode 2 of how low self-esteem shows up in the workplace. My name's Andrew Farquharson.
And my name's Abby Twomlow. If you haven't joined us before, thank you for joining us. We talk about mental health and well-being in the workplace, and September we're looking particularly at self-esteem. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're glad you're here. So, we are both mental health trainers. We work in workplaces, we work in schools, and we want to talk today about low self-esteem and what that looks like in the workplace. Because quite often you might think that that's not your problem, that's down to the individuals. It might not be to do with work, it might be to do with home, but it does matter. It matters for you as a leader, it matters for your team. Um, because low self-esteem isn't just personal, it's not about that one person. When somebody's got low self-esteem, it spills into the workplace. It can affect confidence, it can affect communication, and it can even affect business outcomes.
Mhm. That's right. And as you said, Abby, that most people think self-esteem is a personal, internal issue, um, something that you perhaps work through with a therapist or a self-help book. Uh, but the reality is that how we feel about ourselves doesn't stay at home. It comes with us into work, to every meeting, every project, every one-to-one conversation. We don't hang it up like a coat when we come into business and then pick it up again when we go out. Low self-esteem isn't just personal. As you say, it does spill into that workplace. So, how does it look? What does it look like on a day-to-day way? Have you any sort of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I suppose the most common way that it shows up is or the things that you can recognize in somebody that might have low self-esteem that you haven't seen or you're unaware of, is it's that person that's in a meeting that avoids speaking up. So they're quite happy to talk on a one-to-one basis, or you see them with their workmates and they're fine, but you put them in a bigger situation and they're the one that sits and doesn't say a word, even though that you know they've got really good ideas and that they can say something really valuable. They really avoid that because they feel uncomfortable about it, or because they think that what they have to say holds no value.
Yeah, or they might say the wrong thing and people will judge them and that sort of thing. Or it could be a person that at first glance seems to be working very hard, is first in the office and last to leave. Um, and they say yes to every project. And you think, oh, great, that's somebody really working well there. They take on extra work without being asked. This sort of perfectionism in a way. But on the surface, they can look like the perfect employee. But underneath, there's, well, you could call it a treadmill of anxiety, deep-seated belief that they constantly have to prove their worth, that they don't feel good enough. So there's overcompensating by the sheer volume of work. This can have all sorts of problems, burnout, poor communication, whatever, as you mentioned.
And it's not just employees as well either. It's management and leadership level as well. So, if you've got maybe it's you or maybe it's somebody in middle management or higher management that struggles to delegate. And again, it's that lack of confidence. So they feel like they have to do everything themselves. They micromanage because they have that lack of self-belief. So they almost don't trust themselves to give things to other people because they feel if they do it all themselves, then it's on them. But that's a hard task, isn't it?
Yeah. And it is because in a sense, low self-esteem is like a master of disguise. It might look like arrogance. It might look like you're extremely humble. But in a workplace, it often surfaces in three distinct areas. But one of the keys to actually knowing and understanding this is self-awareness. And that's something we'll talk about on another time. But you also mentioned that the sort of the communications gap,
Yeah.
as it's called, um, is one of the most common signs that the person who, on a one-to-one basis, might have great ideas come up and so on, but as you said, are really reluctant to bring it out in a group setting, fear of criticism.
Or
And
judgment. That's that feeling of being judged, isn't it? And what everybody else might think. So very
that's right.
avoidant and not saying anything at all.
Also, not asking for clarification in a meeting situation about something because you don't want to look as though you're being stupid or I don't understand. So you might go off and do something and it doesn't quite work,
Yeah,
whatever it might be.
yeah. And there'll be people sitting there now that already think this sounds like somebody that I know. It sounds like somebody in my team, or even, oh my God, this sounds like me.
Yes, yeah.
And that's fine. Perhaps you never really thought about it because a lot of people never give their self-esteem much consideration, or they've never really thought about why they get so uncomfortable not speaking up, or why they find it uncomfortable to delegate. We don't often question those things. We just feel like we like control, don't we?
Hmm.
Um, so I suppose we need to have a look at the impact of each one. And I suppose if we start with that communication gap, because we talked about that, but when you are holding back and you're not asking questions and or you're avoiding feedback, that's the other thing. If you've got like a professional development meeting and they're really uncomfortable or easily upset about feedback, that I think that's another clear one. But it means that there's errors that aren't caught early.
Yeah.
They make mistakes because they haven't clarified, and you think, oh, why didn't you just ask? Like it was a really simple thing to not make a mistake about. And it can make you quite frustrated as a leader, I suppose, that you've got that person that's over and over again just not asking when they haven't understood and is then making errors, or they're not being as innovative. I can't say that word.
Innovative.
As they can be because they've missed points and not clarified.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that can have potentially a really big impact on a business if you've got somebody that's doing that within your business, especially when you know that they can do better, when you know that they're capable of more. That can be really frustrating knowing how to deal with that. But a lot of the time, it's about self-esteem.
Hmm. And that leads to sort of self-protection. So you're not going to open yourself up to any form of criticism or your perception of what criticism might be. The other thing is the effect, overcompensation, burnout. The example I mentioned earlier about the ever-present, always working person
Yeah.
uh, there. Overcompensating, burnout, sense of self-worth becomes completely tied to their output.
Yeah, they're constantly trying to prove themselves and prove that they're good enough, but that's actually not necessarily proving it to you. It's almost about proving it to themselves because their self-esteem is so low. And again, they might outwardly seem to be like the best employee,
Mhm.
but the long-term impact of that is stress. They're constantly running on high stress. And when you've got high stress all the time, that can create illness. So you tend to have that person that gets ill quite a lot. And it might not be that they're off with stress or off with mental health. They might just have repeated low level illnesses. You're much more likely to get colds and migraines, and because when you're stressed you reduce your immune system. So if you've got somebody that's got quite high absence, then maybe look at their self-esteem. And also, as a different side to that, is they can feel quite resentful.
Yes,
They can start to dislike their job because it's making them feel so stressed and they feel like they've got so much work to do. But actually, a lot of that work they're setting themselves. Um, and they're setting themselves that high standard, and they end up taking work home with them or feeling like they're not completing things. Then they feel not good enough, and then that starts to build resentment, and that can be a really big problem as well.
that's right. And if you sort of reflect on it a bit, you might notice that before somebody left the job, that they had become a bit outwardly more stressed or more resentful, disengaged to a certain extent. Things like overcompensating is not a sustainable way of being. And it ultimately hurts the individual and the business.
Yeah.
And it also has a much wider effect, their effect on their relationships at home and with friends, etc. So it's not not a good thing.
No.
Talking about leadership, the third element of this sort of what happens is you could say is leadership blind spot. And as leaders, it sort of requires us to basically have a wee look in the mirror to become self-aware. How much are we a part of that? Is that me? Like you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that is me, you know?
Yeah, because I think a lot of the time everybody presumes that the leader has got high self-esteem, that they know what they're doing and that they feel good about it, but that's not always the case. And even sometimes the leader can feel confident or they are outwardly confident, but on the inside is a whole different story. And actually having a real struggle with their confidence in leading and not sure if they're doing the best thing and really questioning themselves all the time
Yeah.
can be a
Because low
problem.
self-esteem in a leader or a manager actually is incredibly damaging to the team you're working with. It can lead to things like micromanagement, because the leader can't delegate because he doesn't trust the team to do the job the right way. But it's really a reflection of their insecurity about maybe losing control, looking bad to the leader's leader type of thing.
And
Uh,
then you've got a team that's got low morale because they don't feel trusted and they don't feel listened to and they feel like they're being spoon-fed unnecessarily, I suppose. So they feel like it's them that's not doing a good job
yeah.
because their manager or leader doesn't trust them.
So it causes all sorts of difficulties and problems. And as we know from previous podcasts, it's about the way that employees feel when they're at work, um, to determine productivity, to determine outcomes. It's not necessarily their skill level. So the impact is enormous. And like you mentioned, the erosion of trust, plummeting morale, and a culture that feels as well, it doesn't feel safe to take risks or to put your head over the parapet.
It can become quite toxic, can't it? Where everybody's sort of complaining about it in the background or whinging about it, and you've just got that bad feeling within a business, and that is not somewhere you want to be because that kind of environment loses you money. It's as
Yeah,
simple as that, or it's not effective, or if you're a school or a service provider and it's not about money necessarily, people aren't doing the job as well as they should be because they don't feel like they are able to or they don't feel like they're trusted. So
yeah.
what
I,
can
I-
leaders do? And I suppose maybe we do need to talk about this from a leader's point of view, maybe. What tools can we give them today that will help them perhaps identify these things in other people or how to start doing something about them?
well, I think the first thing is awareness. You have to know that there may be an issue, maybe a problem, and you have to know that actually about yourself. You might think you're aware of everything, but I think there was a study a few years at, I think it was Harvard University, into about 10,000 of their students about self-awareness. And all of these students had said prior to the study they were all self-aware. But after the research, it came to the conclusion that only about 5% actually were properly self-aware.
Yeah. It was an
So,
interesting one. Something like 95% said that they had above average self-awareness, didn't they? I think was the stat,
yeah.
like a massive amount. And very, very few of them did. So I suppose taking a look in the mirror sometimes and asking yourself,
Hmm.
am I avoiding stuff? Am I overcompensating? Am I micromanaging? And it's a question that you can ask your team as well. It doesn't just have to be you, because sometimes as a leader, it's your job to get your team to see these things in themselves. It's not to tell them that they're doing those things, it's to get them to identify and question it themselves. So, is there any avoidance? Are you overcompensating or are you micromanaging?
Yeah. And when you ask the question, are you doing any of these things? It's actually to reflect on the answer as well. Why is it you think that? Why is it you do that? Is it because you feel that my ideas aren't worthy of consideration or
Hmm.
thought, or does everything I say have to be perfect?
Because behaviors and responses don't just happen, they don't come from nowhere. Everything is driven from a belief, isn't it? You have to have a belief to create thoughts. You have to believe that you're not good enough for you then to have those thoughts of like, what will people think? What if people judge me? What if people think negatively about me? And then it's those thoughts that drive the response or the behavior. So when you are having these things, they're all driven by a belief. So ask yourself what belief about myself might be driving this micromanaging or this um, overcompensating. What is it that I believe about myself that is making me do that? Because I think that's how you develop that self-awareness, isn't it? Once you're aware of that belief, then you can start working on it. You can do something about it. And I suppose one of the quickest and easiest things to do is to reframe those beliefs and reframe those thoughts. And by that, we mean look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah,
Um, and sometimes just thinking, well, if I didn't believe that about myself, if I believed something more helpful, that I do have lots of good ideas, then what would I think next? What would my thoughts be? And what would I be doing differently? Because it can change that whole pattern of behavior, can't it? When you just switch an unhelpful belief to a more helpful one.
yeah, and that leads to then all sorts of extra ideas and thoughts, and that's what really happens. And also the idea that if something doesn't quite work out, it's not a mistake. It's just not quite worked out in that particular area. But because you're open then and you become aware and you've thought about reframing things, you go, well, how can I make it work out?
Yeah.
What's the way? As opposed to, see, I knew I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's what I like to call dead end thinking. As soon as you think something like, oh, I knew it wouldn't work, that's it. You've hit a brick wall, haven't you?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
okay, it didn't go quite the way I planned. Why? What can I do differently? Can I try something again? It's much more of an active process when you're thinking in a more helpful way like that. So, um, and this is where you can use all sorts of tools to help with that. Obviously, working with um, a professional to help you to think about those things in more detail, because to change those patterns long term takes a bit of work. Feedback and the way that you speak to your employees and helping them to be a bit more self-aware is important. But again, you have to do that in the right way. So often getting some support can be a good idea with that. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
suppose that, oh, go on.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, you were talking about feedback and so on. The language that is used is very important as well. So, for instance, if you want to find out how a project's gone or something like that, and you're feeding back and you're asking the question, what went right and what went wrong, the instant there is to focus in on the what went wrong.
Hmm.
And also it builds up a sense of tension and anxiety in the person you're talking to. So coming back to the language aspect of things is you could say in that situation, so what went right and what could be done better? And that then reduces that sense of being put in a spot, the internal feeling of, oh, I've made a mistake, or we made a mistake there. Well, what could be done better is X, Y, and Z.
And not what could you have done better either,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's making it personal and making that person feel like they haven't done a good job. You know, what could we do differently next time? If we were going to do it again, what would we change? Those
yeah.
kind of that language that makes somebody feel like they've got some power over the outcome.
And they feel
Um,
part of it.
yeah, and they feel listened to and they feel involved rather than there being a blame put on what hasn't worked. And it's really simple, isn't it? But actually, that language is still used all the time and will impact people within your business.
It is important the language you use, and becoming aware is also aware of the language you use and the impact it has. You might say, oh, it doesn't have that much of an impact. Well, it's the whole basis of marketing, it's the whole basis of advertising, it's the whole basis for politicians, etc. the language they use, they want to try and change and do things. This whole thing is not going to happen overnight because you need to practice a wee bit to build new habits of self-awareness and just feel good. But it's not going to take you a long time.
If you're
Yeah,
persistent, it can take just a few weeks, can't it? But you're not
yeah,
likely to do that on your own, I don't think, because it takes a lot more determination, I think, to do it on your own. It's better to have somebody almost to be accountable for. So do it with other leaders or do it as part of a team and make it something that you're working on together. Because if it's just something you're trying to do by yourself, you can lose motivation and forget about it quite quickly, especially when you're in a job that's busy where your focus is elsewhere. But
yeah.
it is definitely something to check in with yourself on a regular basis. But I suppose the thing to remember is that self-esteem isn't something that's fixed. It's not something that people are stuck with, and it's not there for no reason. It is something that can be nurtured and can be developed, just like confidence. You can grow more of it, but your workplace and you as a leader will impact that in your team. Um, so if you can be aware of how it shows up and you're starting to notice it within yourself and within your team and your leadership, or then you can start making those changes because
Right.
that's important. If you start to see it, then you need to start doing something about it.
I really want to emphasize what Abby said there. Low self-esteem isn't a fixed personality trait. It's not a life sentence. You can it's a pattern of thought and you can unlearn it. And you can unlearn it relatively quickly and replace it with something much more helpful to you. But you need to be aware.
Without going too deep into the psychology, your self-esteem is only ever 2 weeks old. It's no more than 2 weeks old. So effectively you are renewing that self-esteem every couple of weeks. But that's a story for another time because that's going quite deep into the
Yeah.
into the how the brain works there. But if you can invest in something, if it's something that you can work on and take the time to improve and invest in, you don't just transform those individuals that are struggling. This isn't picking those people out that you know are struggling and fixing them. That's not what this is about. You need to be building a business that makes people feel good, that builds people's self-esteem automatically, really, just as part of the ethos. Because when you do that, you have strong teams and you have a better workplace culture and you create a business that people want to work in.
And that then leads to the sort of bottom line. It becomes more productive, it becomes more profitable. And so in any way that you judge a business, whether it's through the so-called soft skills or through the hard cash, you're improving it.
Yeah.
You're building that environment. And in a sense, you as a leader, when you're feeling much, when you feel you've got greater self-esteem, you it then sort of works osmotically in a sense to your team in the workplace. You don't just then transform individuals, you transform the whole environment and you strengthen the workplace culture, etc.
And this is exactly what we do in businesses, isn't it? We go in and offer that training to everybody, or offer that training a bit more in depth to leadership, so that you know how to do that properly within your business, and also you've got somebody to work alongside to make sure that you're focusing on that. So if this episode has resonated with you and you'd like that support with building self-esteem and confidence within your team or within your leadership, then just give us a shout. You can drop us a message. You can go to wellbeingtrainingacademy.com or find us on LinkedIn, drop us a comment below. There's lots of ways to get in touch, and we're always really happy to help, or even just to chat through ways that we might be able to help. So, yeah, get in touch with us if that's something you'd like some help with.
Yep. Brilliantly put. Excellently put. So I'll just say until next time, bye bye.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care.